Racist police officer grabbed black woman by the neck at airport, not knowing she was a secret government agent. The sound of her neck cracking against the cold marble floor echoed through Terminal C like a gunshot. For a moment, everything stopped. Travelers froze mid-step, phones suspended in the air, children's laughter dying in their throats. Detective Marcus Sullivan's hand was still wrapped around the woman's throat, his knee pressed into her back, his breath hot with rage and something darker, something that had been festering in him for years. "I said don't move." His voice cut through the terminal like broken glass. The woman beneath him, Dr. Amara Hayes, didn't scream, didn't beg. Her brown eyes, now level with the scuffed airport floor, simply closed for a moment. Not in surrender, but in something that looked almost like prayer. Or perhaps calculation. "Sir, please." A young TSA agent stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Sir, I think there's been a mistake." "Get back," Marcus snarled, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. This suspect was acting suspiciously, refused to comply, and reached into her bag despite direct orders. Lies. Every word a carefully constructed lie. What had actually happened just 90 seconds earlier was far simpler and far more damning. Amara had been standing in the priority security line, her carry-on bag placed neatly in the bin, her boarding pass in hand. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit, her natural hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her posture radiating the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every credential framed on her office wall. She was also exhausted. 48 hours earlier, she'd been in a classified briefing room in Washington, D.C., reviewing intelligence reports that would make most people lose sleep for weeks. Now she just wanted to get home to Atlanta, to her elderly mother who was recovering from surgery, to 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. "Ma'am, step aside." Marcus had appeared beside her, his voice already carrying an edge that had nothing to do with security protocols. Amara looked up, confused. "Excuse me?" "I said step aside. Random selection for additional screening." She glanced at the TSA supervisor nearby who looked equally puzzled but said nothing. The queue behind her shifted uncomfortably. "Of course." Amara stepped out of line, professional, cooperative. She'd been through this before. Too many times before. But this time was different. Before we continue this incredible story, subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your support helps us share more stories of hope, dignity, and second chances. Marcus had watched her place her bag on the inspection table, had seen her remove her laptop, her tablet, the small leather journal she carried everywhere. Standard procedure. But when she reached into the front pocket of her bag, reaching for her reading glasses, nothing more. His hand had shot out like a striking snake. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm just getting my hands where I can see them now." The terminal's ambient noise began to fade as nearby travelers sensed the shift in atmosphere, that electric charge that precedes violence. "Officer, I'm simply—" Amara's voice remained calm, but her heart rate had already begun to climb. She recognized what was happening. She'd seen it happen to others. She'd written reports about it. She'd testified before Congress about it. But knowing doesn't prepare you for when it happens to you. You're reaching for a weapon. Marcus's voice rose, and suddenly there were hands on her, rough, angry hands spinning her around, slamming her against the metal table. Her glasses flew off, clattering across the floor. Someone gasped. A child started crying. "I don't have a weapon," Amara said, her voice steady even as her cheek pressed against cold steel. "I'm a federal employee. My credentials are in my—" That's when Marcus's hand found her throat. The violence was so sudden, so disproportionate, that for several seconds no one intervened. This was authority. This was a badge and a gun, and the presumption of rightness that came with it. But Amara knew something Marcus didn't. She knew that 16 security cameras were recording every angle. She knew that her biometric signature had already pinged 3 separate government databases the moment she'd entered the terminal. She knew that in a room somewhere in this very airport, agents were probably already moving, already responding to the automatic alert triggered when her vital signs spiked. She also knew something more important. She knew how to survive this moment. "I can't breathe." The words came out as barely a whisper. Marcus's grip tightened. "Should have thought about that before you tried to reach for Detective Sullivan." A new voice cut through the chaos, sharp and authoritative. "Remove your hands from that woman, now." Captain Elena Rodriguez stood 10 feet away, her TSA supervisor uniform crisp, her expression carved from stone. She'd been watching the security feeds from her office when the alert came through. She'd recognized Amara's face immediately, not personally, but from the quarterly briefings TSA supervisors received about individuals with top-level security clearances who should never, under any circumstances, be detained without federal authorization. Marcus didn't move. "This is a police matter, Captain. Stay out of it." "That woman is Dr. Amara Hayes." Elena's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "And if you don't remove your hands from her in the next 3 seconds, you won't just lose your badge. You'll be lucky if you're only facing assault charges." Something in Elena's tone finally penetrated Marcus's rage. His hand loosened, just slightly. Amara drew in a painful breath, her throat burning, but she didn't move, didn't resist. She'd learned long ago that survival sometimes meant submission, not because you were weak, but because you were wise enough to know when resistance would only make things worse. "Check her credentials," Elena ordered a nearby agent, her eyes never leaving Marcus. "And someone call airport security, real security." The young TSA agent carefully opened Amara's wallet, his hands trembling. What he found made his face go pale. "Captain," he whispered, holding up an ID card. She's Department of Homeland Security, Senior Special Agent, Counterterrorism Division." The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of shock spreading through the growing crowd of onlookers. Marcus's knee finally lifted from Amara's back. His hand released her throat. But instead of apology or shame, his face twisted into something uglier, defensive anger, wounded pride. "She should have identified herself immediately," he said, his voice too loud, too aggressive. "She was acting suspiciously, refusing to comply." "I did comply." Amara finally spoke, pushing herself up from the floor with painful slowness. Her voice was hoarse, but each word was clear. "I did everything you asked, until you decided I was guilty of something I hadn't done." She stood now, retrieving her glasses from where they'd fallen. One lens was cracked. She put them on anyway, and when she looked at Marcus, he actually stepped back. Because what he saw in her eyes wasn't anger. It was something far more devastating. It was recognition. The kind of recognition that comes from seeing someone completely, understanding them entirely, and finding them wanting. "Do you know why I didn't fight back?" Amara asked quietly. The terminal had gone so silent that her whisper carried like a shout. "Because I knew that if I did, you'd justify everything you just did to me. You'd write in your report that I was aggressive, threatening, non-compliant, and people would believe you. Because they always believe the badge." Marcus's jaw clenched. "I was doing my job. Your job." Amara's laugh was bitter and broken. "I've spent 15 years protecting this country from actual threats. I've stared down terrorists, infiltrated criminal organizations, put my life on the line more times than I can count. And the most danger I faced today was from the man wearing a badge who swore to protect and serve." Captain Rodriguez stepped between them, her hand raised. "Doctor Hayes, we have a medical team on the way. I'm also calling in." "That won't be necessary." Another voice, this one coming from the crowd. A man in a dark suit pushed through the gathered travelers, his stride purposeful, his face grim. He flashed a badge, not to Marcus, but to Elena. Federal credentials that made even the captain's eyes widen slightly. "Agent Michael Torres, FBI Liaison Office." He turned to Amara, his expression softening just slightly. "Dr. Hayes, are you all right?" Amara touched her throat gingerly, already feeling the bruises forming. "I'll live, Torres, though I'm guessing my afternoon just got a lot more complicated." "More complicated for some than others." Torres's gaze shifted to Marcus, and his voice hardened. Detective Marcus Sullivan, badge number 4729, Chicago PD, currently on suspension pending investigation. Want to tell me what you're doing in Boston? And why you just assaulted a federal agent? The color drained from Marcus's face. I'm on personal leave. I have every right. You have no jurisdiction here. Elena's voice was ice. You identified yourself as law enforcement to interfere with TSA security procedures. You physically assaulted a traveler without cause, and you did it all while under suspension. She turned to the gathering airport security officers. Detain him. This is ridiculous. Marcus's voice climbed toward panic. She was suspicious. Anyone would have... Anyone? Amara's voice cut through his protestations like a scalpel. Or anyone black? Anyone who looks like me? The question hung in the air, unanswerable and damning. Marcus's silence was its own confession. As airport security moved in, as phones continued recording, as the truth of what had happened began to crystallize in the minds of everyone watching, Amara felt the familiar weight settle onto her shoulders. This wouldn't end here. It never ended here. This moment would become a report, an investigation, maybe even a news story. And through it all, she'd have to remain composed, professional, dignified, even though her throat burned and her heart ached, and every fiber of her being wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. But she'd learned long ago that dignity, not rage, was her most powerful weapon. Captain Rodriguez, she said quietly, I'll need copies of all security footage. And I'll be filing a formal complaint, not just about Detective Sullivan, but about the systemic failures that allowed this to happen in the first place. Elena nodded slowly. You'll have everything you need, Dr. Hayes. I promise you that. As Marcus was led away, still protesting, still unable to grasp the magnitude of what he'd done, Amara finally allowed herself to sit down on one of the nearby benches. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline crash hitting hard. Agent Torres sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. The Bureau will support you fully on this, Amara. Whatever you need. What I need, Amara said softly, staring at her hands, is for this to be the last time, but we both know it won't be. Torres had no answer to that, because they both knew she was right. The terminal slowly began to return to normal, travelers collecting their bags, security lines reforming, the machinery of travel grinding back into motion. But something had shifted. People who had witnessed what happened couldn't quite meet Amara's eyes. Some looked ashamed. Others looked angry. A few looked moved to tears. An elderly white woman approached hesitantly, her own hands trembling. Miss, I saw everything. I recorded it on my phone. If you need witnesses, Thank you. Amara's voice cracked slightly. That's very kind. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. My grandson, he's about your age. And I pray every day that people see him for who he is, not what they assume he must be. She paused. You showed such grace just now, such strength. I don't know how you did it. Practice, Amara said quietly. Too much practice. As the woman walked away, Amara closed her eyes again. In a few hours, she'd be home. She'd see her mother, who had marched in Selma, who had faced down fire hoses and police dogs, who had taught her daughter that survival was an act of resistance and dignity was a form of defiance. And her mother would look at the bruises on her throat and say what she always said. Baby, you keep walking with your head high, you keep being excellent, because your excellence is what terrifies them most. But right now, in this moment, Amara just wanted to cry. She didn't. Not yet. Not here. Instead, she stood up, collected her belongings, and prepared to continue her journey. Because that's what you did. You got up, you kept moving, you survived. Even when survival felt like the hardest thing in the world. Before we continue this incredible story, subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your support helps us share more stories of hope, dignity, and second chances. 3 days later, Amara sat in her mother's modest kitchen in Atlanta, an ice pack pressed against her still bruised throat. The smell of collard greens and cornbread filled the small house, comforting and familiar, a connection to roots that ran deeper than pain. They suspended him, Amara said quietly, scrolling through the email on her phone. Pending full investigation. The Chicago PD opened an internal affairs inquiry, and the FBI is reviewing whether federal charges are warranted. Dorothy Hayes, 73 years old with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much history, poured sweet tea into 2 glasses. Her hands were steady, but Amara noticed how her mother's jaw tightened when she glanced at her daughter's throat. Suspended, Dorothy repeated, the word heavy with decades of bitter experience. Not arrested, not charged immediately. Suspended with pay, I'm guessing? Amara nodded. They both knew what that meant. They'd seen it before. The administrative leave that stretched for months, the investigations that quietly concluded with no wrongdoing found, the officer returning to duty with nothing more than a notation in a file that would never affect his career. Mama, don't. Amara reached across the table, taking her mother's hand. I'm okay. I'm handling it the right way, through official channels, with documentation, with witnesses. And how many times have we done it the right way? Dorothy's voice was soft but sharp as a razor. How many reports have you filed? How many testimonies have you given? How many times have you stood in front of Congress explaining why a black woman with more degrees than a thermometer and more clearances than the president still gets treated like a threat? The question hung between them, unanswerable because they both knew the answer. Too many times. Never enough to change anything fundamental. Dorothy sat down heavily, her post-surgery fatigue evident. Baby, I'm proud of you. Lord knows I'm proud. But sometimes I wonder if all your excellence, all your achievements, if they matter at all when a man with a badge can still put his hands on your throat and face no real consequences. They matter to me, Amara said firmly. They matter because I refuse to let people like him define who I am or what I'm capable of. And they matter because somewhere there's a young girl who looks like me watching this, and she needs to know that we don't back down. Dorothy smiled through tears she wouldn't let fall. You sound just like your grandmother. She'd be so proud of you, baby. So proud. They sat in silence for a moment, the kitchen clock ticking steadily, marking time in a struggle that seemed to have no end. 1,600 miles away in a studio apartment in Chicago that smelled of old takeout and stale beer, Marcus Sullivan stared at his phone screen with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The video had gone viral, 27 million views in 3 days. Every news outlet from CNN to Fox had run the story. The headlines varied. Federal agent assaulted by off-duty detective. Racist attack at Boston airport caught on camera. Hero agent maintains dignity despite brutal assault. But they all showed the same footage. Him. His hand on her throat. His knee on her back. His voice loud and aggressive, accusing her of crimes she hadn't committed. And her, Dr. Amara Hayes, calm, composed, dignified even as he brutalized her. The comment section was a war zone. Some people defended him. He was just doing his job. She should have identified herself faster. Cops have to make split-second decisions. But those voices were drowned out by the others, the ones calling him a thug, a racist, a disgrace to the badge. His phone buzzed. Another text from his ex-wife. Danny saw the video at school. Kids are calling his dad a racist. Thanks for that, Marcus. His son. His 12-year-old son who'd already stopped talking to him after the divorce, who'd already lost respect for him when the drinking started. Now this. Marcus threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall but didn't break, unlike everything else in his life. He stood up, pacing the small apartment like a caged animal. How had it come to this? He'd been a good cop once. No, not just good, great. Decorated. Respected. He'd worked his way up from patrol officer to detective, had made cases that took real criminals off the streets. But then the shooting happened. 2 years ago. A routine traffic stop that went wrong. The driver, a kid really, 19 years old, had reached for something in his glove compartment. Marcus had fired. 4 shots. The kid died before the ambulance arrived. The investigation cleared him, found the shooting justified, But what they found in the kid's glove compartment wasn't a gun. It was his registration, exactly where Marcus had told him to reach. After that, something broke inside him. The nightmares started. The drinking got worse. His marriage fell apart. And somewhere along the way, the fear that haunted him, the fear that he'd killed an innocent person, transformed into something uglier, into anger, into resentment, into a need to prove that he'd been right, that the threat was real, that people who looked like that kid were dangerous. It was easier to be angry than to feel guilty. Easier to see threats everywhere than to admit he'd become the thing he'd sworn to fight against. The day at the airport, he'd been on his way to visit his sister in Boston, trying to put distance between himself and the suspension, the investigation, the reporters who kept calling. He'd spotted Dr. Hayes in the security line, and something in his damaged brain had sparked. She looked confident, composed, successful, everything he no longer was. And she was black, like the kid he'd killed, and in that moment all his rage and guilt and self-hatred found a target. He'd convinced himself she was suspicious. He'd convinced himself he was preventing a threat. He'd convinced himself he was still one of the good guys. Now, watching the video loop again on the news, he couldn't convince himself of anything except the truth. He was the threat. He was the danger. He was the monster. His phone buzzed again. He retrieved it from where it had fallen, expecting another message from his ex-wife. Instead, it was from his union rep. "Marcus, we need to talk. Legal counsel advises you prepare for criminal charges. The FBI isn't backing down. Neither is she." Marcus read the message 3 times. Criminal charges, federal charges, prison time, potentially. And beneath the fear, beneath the panic, he felt something unexpected. Relief. Maybe he deserved it. Maybe this was the justice he'd avoided after the shooting. Maybe this was the universe finally holding him accountable. He thought about Dr. Hayes, about the way she'd looked at him with recognition, not rage. She'd seen right through him, seen the broken, frightened man hiding behind the badge and the gun. The worst part was that she'd survived him. She'd maintained her dignity while he lost his. She'd shown grace while he showed nothing but ugliness. Who was the real threat in that terminal? The question haunted him. A week after the incident, Amara returned to work at the Department of Homeland Security's Atlanta field office. Her colleagues greeted her with a mixture of support and discomfort. Some embraced her, telling her how proud they were of her composure. Others avoided eye contact, unsure what to say. Her supervisor, Deputy Director James Walsh, called her into his office within an hour of her arrival. "Amara, before we talk about anything else, how are you?" "Really?" Walsh was a career federal agent, 60 years old with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen everything and still managed to show compassion. "I'm okay, Jim." Amara touched her throat unconsciously. The bruises had faded to yellow-green, hidden beneath her collar. "Physically, anyway." Walsh nodded slowly. "I've been in law enforcement for 35 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what you went through. The restraint you showed, the dignity. Amara, you handled that situation better than most trained agents would have." "I've had practice," she said quietly, echoing what she'd told the woman at the airport. "I know. And that's the tragedy, isn't it?" Walsh leaned back in his chair. "The fact that you, a decorated federal agent with top-level security clearance, have had to develop skills for surviving encounters with law enforcement. That says something damning about the system we're all part of. Are you going somewhere with this, Jim?" "The secretary wants you in Washington, tomorrow. You're being asked to testify before a Senate committee about reforming law enforcement protocols, specifically regarding the treatment of minority federal employees." Amara closed her eyes. Of course they did. Turn her trauma into a teaching moment, her pain into policy recommendations that would probably go nowhere. "And if I refuse?" "Then you refuse. No pressure, Amara, but—" Walsh hesitated. "But you have a platform right now. The whole country is watching. What happened to you has started a conversation that needs to happen. Your voice matters." "My voice always mattered," Amara said sharply. "It mattered before some racist cop put his hands on me. It mattered when I was writing reports that nobody read. when I was giving presentations that nobody implemented. Why does it take violence for people to listen? Walsh had no answer, because there was no good answer. I'll think about it, Amara finally said, standing. But Jim, I'm not interested in being a symbol. I'm not interested in being the good victim who turns her assault into inspiration. I'm interested in actual change. I know. That's why they want you there. As Amara left his office, she found Agent Torres waiting in the hallway. He'd been checking in regularly since Boston, making sure she had everything she needed for the investigation. Torres, do I look like someone who wants to testify before Congress? He smiled slightly. You look like someone who's tired of being strong when you should be allowed to be angry. The accuracy of his observation stopped her. Is it that obvious? Only to people who've been paying attention. Torres fell into step beside her as they walked through the office. For what it's worth, I think you should go to Washington. Not because they're asking, but because you have something to say that needs to be said. And what's that? That the system is broken, that it's been broken for a long time, and that all the training and protocols and policy reforms in the world won't fix it unless we address the fundamental issue, that some people see others as threats simply because of the color of their skin. Amara stopped walking, turning to face him. You know what's going to happen if I testify? They'll listen. They'll nod sympathetically. They'll promise to do better, and then nothing will change. A few months from now, it'll happen again to someone else, and the cycle continues. Maybe, Torres conceded, but maybe not. Maybe this time because it was you, because it was captured on camera, because you handled it with such dignity. Maybe this time it actually breaks through. You really believe that? Torres looked at her for a long moment. I believe in you. I believe you have the power to make people see what they've been refusing to see. Whether they do anything about it, that's on them. That night, Amara sat in her home office, surrounded by case files and commendations, awards and credentials that documented a career built on excellence. On her desk was a photograph of her grandmother, taken during the civil rights marches of the 1960s. She stood tall in the image, sign held high, dignity radiating from every line of her face. Next to it was a photo of Amara herself at her graduation from Quantico, her mother beaming beside her, both of them full of hope about the future she was building. Between those two images, between her grandmother's fight and her own, how much had really changed? Her phone buzzed, an email from an address she didn't recognize. She almost deleted it, but something made her click it open. The message was short. Dr. Hayes, my name is Jennifer Sullivan. I'm Marcus Sullivan's ex-wife. I need to talk to you. Not to defend him. I can't defend what he did. But to explain some things that might matter. Please. Amara stared at the email for a long time. Every instinct told her to delete it, to maintain professional distance, to let the investigation run its course without complicating things. But another part of her, the part that had chosen a career in federal service because she believed in justice, not just punishment, was curious. What could this woman possibly say that would matter? Against her better judgment, Amara typed a response. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., video call, 5 minutes. She hit send before she could reconsider. Sometimes understanding the monster was the first step toward slaying it. Not excusing it, not forgiving it, but understanding it enough to ensure it couldn't hurt anyone else. As she closed her laptop and prepared for bed, Amara caught sight of her reflection in the window. The bruises were almost gone, but she could still feel Marcus Sullivan's hand on her throat, still hear his voice full of unearned authority and barely contained rage. Tomorrow, she'd hear from his ex-wife. The day after, she'd go to Washington and testify before Congress. And through it all, she'd carry the weight of representing not just herself, but every person who'd ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. It was exhausting being a symbol when all you wanted to be was human. But her grandmother hadn't quit. Her mother hadn't quit, and neither would she. Outside her window, Atlanta slept, unaware that one woman was preparing to challenge a system that had been broken for generations. Unaware that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a badge, but the courage to speak truth to power. even when power doesn't want to listen. Jennifer Sullivan's face filled Amara's laptop screen at exactly 2:00 p.m. She was younger than Amara expected, mid-30s with tired eyes and the kind of exhaustion that came from years of carrying someone else's burdens. "Dr. Hayes, thank you for agreeing to talk to me." Jennifer's voice cracked slightly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," Amara admitted. "You have 5 minutes, Mrs. Sullivan." "It's Ms. now. I divorced him 8 months ago." Jennifer glanced away from the camera, composing herself. "I want to be clear. Nothing I'm about to say excuses what Marcus did to you. Nothing. He deserves every consequence coming his way." "Then why are we talking?" Jennifer took a shaky breath. "Because I think you deserve to know who he was before he became the man who hurt you. Not to make you feel sorry for him, but because I think you're the only person who might be able to reach him now." Amara's expression hardened. "I'm not his therapist, Ms. Sullivan, and I'm certainly not his savior." "I know. God, I know." Jennifer wiped at her eyes. "But he's my son's father. And Danny, my 12-year-old, he's been getting bullied at school. Kids calling his dad a racist, a monster. And the worst part is Danny doesn't know how to defend him because he's not sure he wants to." The mention of a child softened something in Amara. She thought of all the children who'd watched that video, who'd seen an authority figure abuse his power, but she also thought of this one child, bearing the weight of his father's sins. "Tell me," Amara said quietly. "Who was he before?" Jennifer's face crumpled with relief. "He was a good man once. Really good. When we met, he was a patrol officer who volunteered at youth centers, who coached Little League, who actually believed he could make his community safer. We got married, had Danny, and for a while, life was good. What changed? 2 years ago, Marcus shot a kid during a traffic stop, 19-year-old named Deshaun Mitchell. The investigation cleared Marcus, said the shooting was justified because the kid reached toward his glove compartment despite orders to keep his hands visible. But Dr. Hayes, Jennifer's voice broke. The kid was reaching for his registration. Marcus had told him to get it, and when Deshaun reached for it, Marcus panicked and fired. Amara felt her stomach tighten. She knew this story. She'd read the report as part of her work analyzing law enforcement incidents. Deshaun Mitchell had been unarmed, cooperative, and terrified. He died because an officer had seen a threat where none existed. Marcus was cleared, Jennifer continued, but he was never the same. The guilt destroyed him. He started drinking, having nightmares, pushing everyone away. He told me once in a moment of drunken honesty that he saw Deshaun's face every time he looked at Danny, that he couldn't forgive himself for taking someone's son from them. So he became what he feared most, Amara said softly. A threat to others. Yes. The guilt transformed into something uglier, into anger, into seeing danger in every black face he encountered, into needing to prove that he'd been right to be afraid. It was like his mind couldn't accept that he'd killed an innocent person, so it started rewriting reality to make everyone look guilty. Amara closed her eyes, understanding more than she wanted to. This was the cycle. Trauma begetting trauma, fear creating the very threats it imagined, good people breaking under the weight of systems that demanded perfection but offered no grace for mistakes. What do you want from me, Jennifer? I want you to know that the man who hurt you, he's not who Marcus was supposed to be. He's who the system broke him into becoming. And I think, Jennifer hesitated, I think if anyone can show him the truth of what he's become, it's you. By forgiving him? By showing mercy he didn't show me? No. By making him see Deshaun Mitchell's face when he looks at you. By making him understand that every time he sees a threat where none exists, he's killing that kid all over again. The 5 minutes had long passed. They sat in silence, two women connected by one man's violence and the cascading consequences that followed. I'll think about what you've said, Amara finally spoke. But Jennifer, your son needs to know that his father's mistakes don't define him. Danny didn't put his hands on my throat. Marcus did. Don't let that boy carry a burden that isn't his. Jennifer nodded, tears streaming freely now. Thank you, Dr. Hayes, for listening, for being kinder than you had any reason to be. After the call ended, Amara sat motionless, staring at her blank screen. Understanding Marcus Sullivan's brokenness didn't excuse his actions. But it did something more complicated. It made him human, not a monster to be destroyed, but a broken man who needed to be held accountable while also being given a chance at redemption. Could both things be true? Could she demand justice while also offering a path toward transformation? She didn't have an answer yet, but tomorrow in Washington she'd have to find one. The Senate hearing room was everything Amara expected. Wood-paneled walls, American flags flanking the committee chair, cameras positioned to capture every moment for the evening news. Senators sat in their elevated seats, looking down at the witness table where Amara would testify. She wore her federal credentials visibly, a navy suit that spoke of authority and competence, and simple pearl earrings her grandmother had worn during her own testimonies decades earlier. Senator Patricia Holbrook, chair of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security, gavelled the hearing to order. Dr. Hayes, thank you for appearing before this committee today. I know this has been a difficult time for you. Thank you, Senator. I'm honored to be here. Amara's voice was steady, professional. Inside, her heart raced. Dr. Hayes, would you please describe in your own words what happened at Boston's Logan Airport on the afternoon of March 15th? Amara took a breath. This was the moment, not just to tell her story, but to frame it in a way that demanded change, not just sympathy. Senator, what happened to me at Logan Airport wasn't an isolated incident. It was the predictable result of a system that trains law enforcement to see certain people as threats regardless of their actual behavior. Several senators shifted in their seats. This wasn't going to be a simple victim testimony. I was traveling home to Atlanta after working on a classified counterterrorism operation. I was exhausted, looking forward to seeing my mother who'd just had surgery. I was in the priority security line when Detective Marcus Sullivan, who was off duty and had no jurisdiction in Boston, decided I looked suspicious. What about your appearance made you look suspicious, Dr. Hayes? Senator Holbrook leaned forward. Nothing about my appearance, Senator, and everything about it. Amara held her gaze. I was a black woman in a nice suit, carrying myself with confidence. To Detective Sullivan, that combination apparently triggered a threat response that had nothing to do with security, and everything to do with his own biases and trauma. That's a serious accusation, Senator James Richardson interjected, his tone defensive. Are you saying Detective Sullivan is racist? I'm saying Detective Sullivan reacted to me the way the system trained him to react. He saw my skin color before he saw my credentials. He saw a threat before he saw a federal agent. He put his hands on my throat before he bothered to ask who I was. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Cameras zoomed in on Amara's face. Dr. Hayes, Senator Holbrook continued, you're one of the highest-ranked black women in Homeland Security. You have multiple degrees, top-level security clearances, and 15 years of exemplary service. Yet you were still assaulted by law enforcement. What does that tell us? It tells us that excellence isn't protection. Achievement isn't armor. I can be the most qualified person in a room and still be seen as a threat simply because of my race. Amara's voice grew stronger. And Senator, if it can happen to me, with all my credentials and resources and federal backing, imagine what happens every day to people who don't have those protections. Senator Richardson jumped in again. But Dr. Hayes, Detective Sullivan was under extreme stress. He'd been involved in a previous incident. You mean when he killed Deshaun Mitchell? Amara cut him off, and the room went silent. Yes, Senator, I know about that. I know Marcus Sullivan is carrying trauma from shooting an unarmed teenager. I know he's struggling with guilt that's transformed into defensiveness and aggression. I know all of that. Then surely you can understand. I understand that his trauma doesn't give him the right to traumatize others. Amara's voice was steel now. I understand that we've created a system where officers are taught to see threats everywhere, where split-second decisions are valued over human life, where a traffic stop can end in death and an airport security line can end in assault. She paused, letting her words settle. But here's what you need to understand, senators. This isn't about one bad cop. This is about a system that creates bad cops, that breaks good people and then sends them out with guns and badges and tells them to make life or death decisions without giving them the tools to deal with their own brokenness. Senator Holbrook nodded slowly. What would you recommend, Dr. Hayes? How do we fix this? First, we stop treating law enforcement trauma as an excuse for brutality. Marcus Sullivan needed help after the Deshaun Mitchell shooting. Instead, he was cleared and sent back to work, where his unresolved trauma festered until it exploded onto me. Amara stood up, a breach of protocol that made several senators lean back in surprise. Second, we acknowledge that implicit bias isn't just a training video problem. It's a foundational flaw in how we recruit, train, and support law enforcement. You can't train away racism in a 4-hour seminar when the entire system is built on assumptions about who's dangerous and who's not. And third? Senator Holbrook asked. Third, we stop protecting officers who abuse their power. Marcus Sullivan assaulted a federal agent on camera with dozens of witnesses, and he's currently suspended with pay while we investigate. If I had put my hands on his throat, I'd be in a cell right now. The double standard is the system. The room erupted again. Some senators nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable, defensive. Dr. Hayes. Senator Richardson's voice was cold now. It sounds like you're advocating for punishment rather than rehabilitation. I'm advocating for both, Senator. Marcus Sullivan needs to be held accountable for what he did to me. But he also needs help. Real help, not just a suspension and a return to duty. He needs to confront what he did to Deshaun Mitchell, to understand how that unresolved trauma has poisoned him. Amara's voice softened slightly. I spoke with his ex-wife yesterday. Did you know he has a 12-year-old son who's being bullied at school because of his father's actions? That child is suffering because we failed to help his father before it came to this. You spoke with Mrs. Sullivan? Senator Holbrook looked surprised. I did. Because I wanted to understand who Marcus Sullivan was before the system broke him. And what I learned is that he was once a good officer who wanted to help his community. What I learned is that the same system that failed Deshaun Mitchell also failed Marcus Sullivan. And now it's failing his son. Amara sat back down, her energy suddenly depleted. So yes, Senator Richardson, I want Marcus Sullivan held accountable. I want him prosecuted, but I also want the system that created him to be held accountable. Because if we only punish him without changing the system, we're just creating the next Marcus Sullivan. The hearing continued for another 2 hours, but Amara's testimony was what made headlines. Not just because of what she said, but how she said it, with a combination of righteous anger and profound empathy that refused to let anyone off the hook, while also refusing to dehumanize the man who'd hurt her. That evening, as news clips of her testimony went viral, Amara received an unexpected message. It was from Marcus Sullivan himself, sent through his attorney. Dr. Hayes, I watched your testimony. You showed me more grace than I showed you, more than I deserved. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm done hiding from what I did. To you, to Deshaun Mitchell, to everyone I've hurt with my fear and my prejudice, I'm pleading guilty to all charges. No deals, no excuses. And I'm asking the court to mandate therapy, not as a way to reduce my sentence, but because you were right. I need help. Real help. Thank you for seeing me as a person even when I failed to see you as one. Marcus. Amara read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was what justice could look like. Not just punishment, but transformation. Not just accountability, but the possibility of redemption. It wouldn't undo what he'd done. It wouldn't erase the trauma or the bruises or the fear, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start was enough. 6 months after the hearing, Marcus Sullivan stood in a federal courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. The man who'd once worn a badge with pride now stood as a defendant, facing the consequences of his actions. Amara sat in the gallery, having chosen to attend despite advice from friends and colleagues to stay away. She needed to see this through, needed to witness justice being served not with vengeance in her heart, but with a complicated hope for something better. Judge Miriam Okonkwo, a Nigerian-American woman with 30 years on the bench, reviewed the case file one final time before speaking. Mr. Sullivan, you've pleaded guilty to federal charges of assault, abuse of authority, and civil rights violations. Your attorney has recommended a plea deal that would reduce your sentence. However, I understand you've rejected that deal. Is that correct? Marcus's voice was hoarse but clear. Yes, Your Honor. Why? Because I don't deserve a reduced sentence. Marcus looked directly at the judge, then briefly at Amara. I assaulted a federal agent. I abused my authority as a law enforcement officer. And I did it because of my own prejudices and unresolved trauma. Dr. Hayes deserves to see full accountability, not a negotiated version of justice. Judge Okonkwo studied him carefully. Mr. Sullivan, the court appreciates your acceptance of responsibility. However, I've also reviewed the psychological evaluations submitted by your defense team. They paint a picture of a man struggling with severe PTSD following a previous incident where you shot and killed 19-year-old Deshaun Mitchell. At the mention of Deshaun's name, Marcus's composure cracked. His shoulders shook, and tears began streaming down his face. Your Honor, what happened to Deshaun Mitchell? His voice broke. I killed an innocent kid. The investigation cleared me, but I knew the truth. I panicked. I saw a threat that wasn't there. And instead of getting help, instead of facing what I'd done, I buried it. I drank. I got angry. I started seeing threats everywhere, especially in faces that reminded me of Deshaun. The courtroom was silent except for Marcus's ragged breathing. And when I saw Dr. Hayes at that airport, something in me snapped. She was confident, professional, successful. Everything I'd convinced myself people like her couldn't be. And that confidence terrified me because it meant I couldn't hide behind my justifications anymore. It meant I had to face that the real threat was never them. It was me. Judge Okonkwo glanced at Amara. Dr. Hayes, you're listed as the victim in this case. Do you wish to make a statement before sentencing? Amara hadn't planned to speak, but she found herself standing, found her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. Your Honor, 6 months ago, Marcus Sullivan put his hands on my throat in an airport. He brutalized me in front of dozens of witnesses, including children. He did it because he saw my skin color before he saw my humanity. Marcus kept his eyes on the floor, unable to look at her. What he did was inexcusable. And I want to be clear, I'm not here to ask for leniency. I'm here because I believe in accountability. But I also believe that accountability without the possibility of redemption is just revenge. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Marcus Sullivan needs to be held responsible for what he did to me. But he also needs to be held responsible for what he did to Deshaun Mitchell, for carrying that trauma without seeking help, for letting it poison him until he became a danger to others. The system that cleared him after that shooting and sent him back to work without addressing his trauma shares responsibility for what happened to me. Judge Okonkwo leaned forward. What are you saying, Dr. Hayes? I'm saying that I want Marcus Sullivan sentenced appropriately for his crimes. But I also want this court to mandate comprehensive psychological treatment, trauma therapy, and a requirement that upon release, he devote time to teaching other officers about the dangers of unaddressed trauma and implicit bias. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes meeting Amara's for the first time. The look on his face was one of disbelief. Not that she would show mercy, but that she would see him as redeemable. Turn his pain into purpose. Amara continued. Make him face what he did, get the help he should have gotten years ago, and use his experience to prevent the next officer from making the same mistakes. That's justice. That's accountability. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we start breaking the cycle. Judge Okonkwo took a long moment before speaking. Mr. Sullivan, this court sentences you to 2 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. During your incarceration, you will participate in intensive trauma therapy and implicit bias training. Upon release, you will complete 1,000 hours of community service, specifically working with police reform organizations to share your story and educate current officers. Marcus nodded, tears still flowing. Thank you, Your Honor. I accept. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm ordering you to write a formal apology to the family of Deshaun Mitchell. Not for legal purposes, but for your own soul. You need to face what you did to that young man before you can truly heal. Yes, Your Honor. As Marcus was led away, he paused beside Amara's row. The bailiff tensed, but Marcus simply said, Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see you. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that grace. Amara nodded, but said nothing. Some moments were too complex for words. 3 months into Marcus's sentence, Amara received an unexpected visitor at her office. Danny Sullivan, now 13, sat nervously in the waiting area with his mother Jennifer beside him. Dr. Hayes, I'm so sorry to show up unannounced, Jennifer said quickly. Danny has something he wants to say to you. I told him it might not be a good idea, but he insisted. Amara looked at the boy, tall for his age, with his father's eyes but his mother's gentle expression. He held a notebook clutched against his chest. It's all right, Amara said softly. Come into my office, Danny. Your mother can come too if you'd like. Danny shook his head. No, I need to do this alone. Inside her office, Danny sat rigidly in the chair across from Amara's desk. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the notebook in his hands. Danny, you don't have to. I wrote you a letter, he blurted out. My therapist said it might help, writing down what I'm feeling. But I wanted you to hear it too. He opened the notebook with trembling hands and began to read. Dear Dr. Hayes, my name is Danny Sullivan, and my dad hurt you. I've seen the video probably 100 times, even though Mom told me not to watch it. Every time I see it, I feel sick because that man in the video, he looks like my dad, but he's not the dad I remember. Danny's voice cracked, but he continued. The dad I remember coached my baseball team and taught me how to ride a bike. He used to take me to the police station and introduce me to all the officers, and I was so proud to be his son. But then something broke in him after he shot that boy, Deshaun. I didn't understand it then. I was only 11, but I knew something was wrong. He started drinking. He stopped coming to my games. He and Mom fought all the time. Tears rolled down Danny's cheeks, but he kept reading. When I saw what he did to you, I was so angry. Not just at him, but at myself, because part of me wasn't even surprised. I'd seen him getting worse, seen him angry all the time, but I didn't know how to help him. And now kids at school call him a racist monster, and I don't know how to defend him because what he did was monstrous. Amara's own eyes filled with tears. But then Mom showed me your testimony. You said Dad was broken, that the system failed him, that he needed help. You could have just wanted him punished, but you wanted him to get better. And I don't understand why you would want that after what he did to you. Danny looked up from his notebook, meeting Amara's eyes. So, I guess I'm here to ask you, why? Why would you care about what happens to the man who hurt you? Amara took a slow breath, choosing her words carefully. Danny, your father did something terrible to me, and I was angry. I still am sometimes. But anger isn't the same as hate. I could hate your father, I could want him to suffer, and nobody would blame me for that. She leaned forward, her voice gentle. But hate doesn't heal anything. It doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't prevent it from happening again. And most importantly, hate would mean I'd given up on believing that people can change, that broken things can be fixed, that there's hope for something better. Do you think he can change? Danny asked, his voice small. I think he's trying. I think the fact that he pleaded guilty, that he's in therapy, that he's facing what he did, that's the beginning of change. It doesn't erase what he did, but it means he's not running from it anymore. Danny nodded slowly. Mom said you have a tough job, that you protect people from bad guys, but you're also protecting my dad from becoming a worse bad guy. That's really hard. It is hard, Amara admitted. But Danny, I want you to understand something important. Your father's mistakes are not your mistakes. His sins are not your sins. You don't have to carry his guilt or his shame. Then why does it feel like I do? Because you love him. And love means feeling the pain of people we care about, even when they've caused pain to others. That's not weakness, Danny. That's humanity. She stood up and walked around the desk, sitting in the chair beside him instead of across from him. Can I tell you something that might help? When I was your age, my uncle was arrested for armed robbery. He made terrible choices, hurt people, went to prison. And I was so ashamed because everyone knew he was my uncle. Kids at school treated me differently. Danny looked at her with surprise. What did you do? My grandmother told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "Baby, you can't control what others do, but you can control who you choose to become. Don't let his mistakes define your path." So I worked hard, got good grades, went to college, became a federal agent. I made my own story. Did your uncle change? He did, actually. He got help in prison, dealt with his addiction, and when he got out, he started working with kids to keep them from making the same mistakes. He turned his pain into purpose, just like I'm hoping your father will. Danny closed his notebook. Dr. Hayes, I want you to know that I'm going to be better than my dad was. I'm going to be someone who sees people for who they are, not what they look like. I'm going to be someone who gets help when I'm hurting instead of hurting other people. Amara felt her heart swell. Danny, you're already that person. The fact that you came here today, that you're trying to understand instead of just being angry, that shows the kind of man you're becoming. Can I ask you one more thing? Of course. Do you forgive him? My dad, I mean. Amara considered the question carefully. I'm working on it. Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once, Danny. It's a choice you make every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Some days I think I've forgiven him and then I touch my throat and remember how scared I was and the anger comes back. So you don't have to forgive him? I don't have to do anything except take care of myself and keep working toward justice. But I want to forgive him, eventually. Not for his sake, but for mine. Because carrying hate around is exhausting, and I have more important things to do with my energy. When Danny and Jennifer left, Amara sat alone in her office for a long time. That conversation had cost her something, had required her to be vulnerable, to share her own family's pain, to offer hope to the son of the man who'd assaulted her. But it had also given her something, the certainty that she was doing the right thing, that choosing understanding over vengeance, accountability over revenge, wasn't weakness. It was the hardest kind of strength. Meanwhile, in federal prison, Marcus Sullivan sat across from his therapist, Dr. Raymond Chen, who specialized in treating law enforcement officers with PTSD. Marcus, we've been meeting twice a week for 3 months now. You've been doing the work, facing difficult truths about yourself. But there's one exercise we haven't done yet, and I think it's time. Marcus looked wary. What kind of exercise? Dr. Chen pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table between them. It was Deshaun Mitchell's senior portrait, taken just weeks before his death. A young man with bright eyes and a hopeful smile, dressed in his best suit. Marcus's entire body tensed. I can't. You can. And you will. Because until you truly see Deshaun as a person, not as a threat or a mistake or a justification, you won't heal. I killed him, Marcus whispered, staring at the photo. I took this kid's whole future, and for what? Because I was scared? Because I panicked? Tell me about him, not about the shooting. About him. Marcus's hands shook as he picked up the photograph. His mother, she gave a statement at my internal review. She said he wanted to be a mechanical engineer, that he'd been accepted to 3 different colleges, that he loved fixing cars and playing basketball with his little brothers. The tears came then, harder than they'd ever come before. He was somebody's son, somebody's big brother. He had dreams and plans and a whole life ahead of him, and I took it. I took all of it because I saw a threat where there was just a scared kid reaching for his registration like I told him to. Why did you see a threat, Marcus? Because I was trained to. Because every day we're told that the job is dangerous, that anyone could be armed, that we need to shoot first or we might not go home to our families. And somewhere in that training, I started seeing every black face as a potential threat. I started believing the statistics instead of seeing the humans. Dr. Chen leaned forward. And what about Dr. Hayes? What did you see when you looked at her? Marcus closed his eyes. I saw confidence that I'd lost, success that I'd thrown away, dignity that I'd never have again, and I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand seeing a black woman doing better than me, being better than me. So I had to take her down, had to prove she was a threat, had to make her as small as I felt. That's the first time you've said that out loud. Because it's the first time I've been able to face it. I wasn't protecting anyone at that airport. I was trying to destroy someone who reminded me of everything I'd failed to be. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. This is hard work, Marcus. The hardest work you'll ever do, but it's necessary. You can't undo what you did to Deshawn or Dr. Hayes, but you can choose who you become from this point forward. Marcus looked at Deshawn's photo again, really looked at it. Dr. Chen, I want to write to his family, not to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. But to tell them the truth, to let them know that their son did nothing wrong, that the failure was mine, that he should still be here. That's a good step, a painful one, but good. As Marcus returned to his cell that night, he carried Deshawn's photo with him. The guard said nothing about the contraband. They'd been briefed that Sullivan was in intensive therapy, that he was actually doing the work instead of just serving time. Marcus placed the photo on his small desk and began to write. Dear Mrs. Mitchell and family, there are no words adequate to express what I took from you when I killed your son, Deshawn. It took him 4 hours to write 1 page. It would take him 3 weeks to finish the letter. And it would take him the rest of his life to live with what he'd done. But for the first time since the shooting, Marcus Sullivan was facing the truth instead of running from it. And in that facing, in that unbearable honesty, something small and fragile began to grow. Not redemption, not yet, but the possibility of it. 2 years later, Amara stood at the entrance of the Deshawn Mitchell Memorial Training Center, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to reforming how law enforcement officers were trained across the country. The building gleamed in the morning sunlight, its glass facade reflecting the neighborhood where Deshawn had grown up. Beside her stood Gloria Mitchell, Deshawn's mother, a woman whose grief had transformed into fierce advocacy. In the years since her son's death, she'd become a powerful voice for police reform, channeling her loss into a mission to ensure no other mother would bury a child due to an officer's panic and prejudice. He would have been 21 today, Gloria said softly, touching the bronze plaque bearing her son's name and photograph. The same smiling senior portrait that now haunted Marcus Sullivan's nightmares and drove his redemption. He would have graduated college this spring, Amara replied, her hand finding Gloria's. Mechanical engineering with honors if he was anything like you described him. Gloria squeezed her hand. Dr. Hayes, when you first contacted me about creating this center, about using my son's name, I didn't know if I could bear it. Every reminder of Deshawn is a knife to my heart. I understand if you've changed your mind. No. Gloria's voice strengthened. No, I haven't changed my mind. Because this, she gestured to the building, this means Deshawn's life mattered, that he didn't die for nothing, that his death is saving others. The center was the result of 18 months of work following Amara's Senate testimony. Her words had sparked a national conversation, leading to federal funding for a pilot program that would fundamentally reimagine police training. Instead of focusing primarily on threat assessment and use of force, the new curriculum emphasized de-escalation, implicit bias recognition, trauma-informed policing, and mental health support for officers. And at the heart of it all was Deshawn's story, not as a statistic but as a human being whose life had value, whose death had meaning, whose memory would teach future generations of officers to see people instead of threats. Inside the center, 60 police recruits from departments across the country sat in a lecture hall waiting. This was the inaugural class, the beginning of something that Amara hoped would spread to every police academy in America. But before she could address them, there was someone else who needed to speak first. Marcus Sullivan walked onto the stage no longer in an orange jumpsuit but in civilian clothes that hung loose on his thinner frame. Prison had aged him, carved lines into his face that spoke of sleepless nights and hard-won wisdom. He'd been released 3 months earlier after serving his full sentence, and he'd immediately volunteered to be part of the center's faculty. The recruits shifted uncomfortably as they recognized him from the viral video that had been shown during their orientation. Some looked disgusted, others looked curious. All of them looked wary. Marcus approached the podium, his hands shaking slightly. Amara watched from the wings, ready to intervene if needed, but trusting that he was ready for this moment. "My name is Marcus Sullivan," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "And I'm the reason this center exists. Not because I'm a hero or a role model, but because I'm a cautionary tale about what happens when trauma, prejudice, and power collide without accountability." He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him filled with two images side by side. Deshaun Mitchell's smiling face and Amara Hayes being assaulted in the airport, Marcus's hand on her throat. "I killed the young man on the left during a routine traffic stop. I was cleared by my department because the shooting was ruled justified. But it wasn't justified. It was murder born of panic and prejudice." Several recruits gasped. This level of honesty was unprecedented. Deshaun Mitchell was reaching for his vehicle registration because I ordered him to. He was compliant, respectful, terrified, and I shot him 4 times because I saw a threat where none existed. I saw his skin color before I saw his humanity. Marcus's voice cracked, but he continued. "And because I never dealt with the trauma of what I'd done, because I never faced the truth that I'd killed an innocent person, that guilt transformed into something uglier, into rage, into seeing every black person as a threat I needed to neutralize." He gestured to Amara's image. 2 years later, I assaulted Dr. Amara Hayes, a decorated federal agent, in an airport. I put my hands on her throat. I brutalized her in front of children. I did it because her confidence and success terrified me, because she represented everything I'd convinced myself couldn't be true. That black excellence exists, that my prejudices were lies, that I was the real threat. The room was absolutely silent. I spent 2 years in federal prison. I lost my career, my marriage, the respect of my son. I lost everything. And you know what? I deserved to lose it all. What I didn't deserve was the grace that Dr. Hayes showed me. Marcus looked toward the wings where Amara stood, and she stepped into view. She could have destroyed me. She could have demanded the maximum sentence and walked away. Instead, she testified that I needed accountability and the possibility of redemption. She fought for this center to exist, for Deshaun's name to mean something more than tragedy. She showed me mercy I never showed her. Amara walked onto the stage, standing beside Marcus at a careful distance, close enough to show unity, far enough to maintain boundaries. "That's not entirely true," Amara said, her voice carrying clearly. "I didn't show you mercy, Marcus. I showed you what justice actually looks like when it's not corrupted by vengeance. Real justice demands accountability, but it also creates pathways for transformation." She turned to address the recruits directly. "You're here because you want to serve your communities, to protect people, to make a difference. That's admirable. But I need you to understand something crucial. The badge you'll wear is not a shield from accountability. The gun you'll carry is not a license for violence. And the authority you'll wield is not permission to see certain people as inherently threatening." One recruit raised her hand tentatively. "Dr. Hayes, how do we know when we're acting on legitimate threat assessment versus prejudice?" "That's the question that should haunt every officer every single day," Amara replied. "And the answer is, you do the work. You examine your own biases. You get therapy when you need it. You speak up when you see other officers crossing lines. You remember that every person you encounter is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's whole world." Marcus stepped forward again. "And when you make a mistake, because you will make mistakes, you face it immediately. You don't cover it up. You don't justify it. You don't let the guilt fester until it poisons you like it poisoned me." Gloria Mitchell had quietly entered the hall and now walked to the stage. The recruits recognized her from the orientation video where she'd shared her son's story. "My son was 19 years old when he died," Gloria said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "He was a good boy. Not perfect. No teenager is perfect, but good. He respected authority. He followed instructions. He did everything right. And he still died because an officer couldn't see past his own fear and prejudice. She paused, letting her words settle. But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I believe that Deshawn's death can mean something if it teaches you to be better than the officer who killed him. If it teaches you to see people, to question your assumptions, to get help when you're struggling, to choose courage over fear. A male recruit in the front row stood up, tears streaming down his face. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I promise that I will honor your son's memory by being the kind of officer he deserved to encounter that night. One by one, other recruits stood, making the same promise. Not performatively, but with genuine emotion and commitment. Gloria nodded, accepting their promises while knowing that promises alone wouldn't be enough. But it was a start. After the training session, Amara and Marcus sat in the center's courtyard, surrounded by a garden that Gloria had designed in Deshawn's memory. Each plant represented something he'd loved. Sunflowers because they were his favorite. Herbs because he'd helped his grandmother garden. A small basketball court because that's where he'd found joy. "How's Danny?" Amara asked, the first personal question she'd asked Marcus since his release. Marcus's face softened. "He's doing well. Really well, actually. He's 14 now, playing on his school's debate team. Jennifer says he wants to become a civil rights attorney. He came to see me once while you were in prison. Did he tell you?" "He did. He told me you were kind to him, that you helped him understand he wasn't responsible for my mistakes." Marcus's voice thickened. "That conversation changed his life, Amara. It freed him from a burden he shouldn't have been carrying. He's a good kid. You should be proud." "I am. But I don't get to take credit for who he's becoming. That's all Jennifer and the people like you who showed him what integrity looks like." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching sunlight filter through the leaves. "Marcus, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always. Do you think you've changed? Really changed? Or are you just saying what people want to hear so you can rebuild your life?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stood up, walking to the edge of the garden where a bronze sculpture depicted Deshawn working on a car engine, his passion frozen in metal. "Every morning, I wake up and look at Deshawn's photo. It's the first thing I see. And every morning, I have to choose who I'm going to be that day, the man who killed him and assaulted you, or the man who's trying to do better." He turned to face her. "Some days that choice is easy. I feel clear about my purpose, grateful for the opportunity to teach others, committed to honoring Deshawn's memory. Other days it's hard. I wake up angry at myself, questioning whether anything I do will ever be enough, wondering if I deserve to be alive when Deshawn isn't. That's not an answer to my question. Yes, it is, because real change isn't a destination, Amara. It's a daily practice. It's choosing every single day to face the truth instead of running from it. Do I still have moments of unconscious bias? Probably. Do I still carry trauma? Absolutely. But the difference is that now I recognize it, I work on it, and I don't let it become someone else's problem." Amara studied him carefully. "I want to believe you, Marcus. I want to believe that people can fundamentally change. But I've seen too many officers go through rehabilitation only to return to the same behaviors. Then don't believe me. Watch me. Hold me accountable. Because that's what I need. People who won't let me slip back into old patterns, who will call me out if they see me failing." "Fair enough." Marcus hesitated, then said what he'd been wanting to say for months. "Amara, I know I can never undo what I did to you. I know that sorry is inadequate, that nothing I do will erase those moments at the airport. But I need you to know that teaching here, sharing my story, trying to prevent other officers from becoming what I became, this is how I'm spending the rest of my life. This is my penance and my purpose. It's not about penance, Marcus. It's about impact. If your story prevents even one officer from making your mistakes, if it saves even one life, then Deshawn's death and my assault will have created something meaningful from tragedy. Do you think Gloria will ever forgive me? Amara shook her head slowly. I don't know. And honestly, she doesn't owe you forgiveness. What she's given you, the opportunity to teach in her son's name, to be part of his legacy, that might be all you get. And you need to be okay with that. I am. I have to be. 6 months later, the Deshaun Mitchell Memorial Training Center graduated its first class of recruits. The graduation ceremony was attended by police chiefs from across the country, politicians who'd supported the program, and families who'd lost loved ones to police violence. Danny Sullivan sat in the front row with his mother, watching as his father received a certificate recognizing his contributions to the program. It was a complicated moment, pride mixed with pain, hope tempered by memory. After the ceremony, Danny approached Amara, now 15 and tall enough to look her almost in the eye. Dr. Hayes, I wanted to thank you. For what, Danny? For giving my dad a chance to be someone I can respect again. He's not the same person he was before everything happened, but he's becoming someone better. Someone who teaches people to be better. Amara smiled. Danny, your father did that work himself. I just opened a door. He chose to walk through it. But you didn't have to open the door. You could have left it locked and thrown away the key. Maybe. But then what would I have taught you? That pain only creates more pain? That people can't change? That giving up on each other is acceptable? Amara shook her head. No, Danny. I opened that door because I needed to believe in redemption as much as your father needed to find it. Jennifer Sullivan approached, wrapping her arm around her son. Dr. Hayes, I never properly thanked you for everything you've done, for Danny, for Marcus, for all of us. You don't need to thank me for demanding accountability. I'm not thanking you for accountability, I'm thanking you for hope. Jennifer's eyes glistened. You showed my son that good people can make terrible mistakes and still find their way back to goodness. In this world, that's a revolutionary thing to teach a child. As the crowd began to disperse, Gloria Mitchell approached the small group. The air grew tense. Gloria and Marcus had never spoken directly since Deshaun's death, had only communicated through lawyers and, later, through the center's administration. Marcus stood frozen as Gloria looked at him with eyes that had seen too much grief. Mr. Sullivan, I want you to know something. Her voice was quiet but firm. I will never forgive you for killing my son. That's not cruelty. It's honesty. You took something from me that can never be restored. Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know, Mrs. Mitchell, I don't expect... But, Gloria continued, I acknowledge that you're trying to do better. I acknowledge that you're using your mistakes to teach others. And I acknowledge that Deshaun would want his death to mean something. She paused. So I'm not offering forgiveness. I'm offering something different. The opportunity to make his life count for something beyond the tragedy you caused. Thank you, Marcus whispered. Thank you for letting me be part of his legacy. Gloria turned to Amara. And you, Dr. Hayes. You turned your trauma into transformation. You refused to let what happened to you be just another statistic, just another video that goes viral and changes nothing. You built something lasting. We built it together, Amara corrected. This center exists because you trusted me with Deshaun's name, because you believed that education could prevent future tragedies. And because you believed that justice and mercy aren't opposites, Gloria added. You showed me that I could demand accountability for my son's killer, while also working toward a world where no other mother loses her child the way I lost mine. The two women embraced, two mothers, one who'd lost a son to violence, another who'd survived violence to fight for other sons and daughters. 3 years after the airport incident, Amara was promoted to Assistant Director of Homeland Security, one of the highest-ranking black women in the agency's history. Her first major initiative was expanding the Deshaun Mitchell Memorial Training Program nationwide, requiring all federal law enforcement agencies to implement its curriculum. Marcus Sullivan, now 48 years old, had become one of the country's most sought-after speakers on police reform and trauma-informed law enforcement. He traveled to police departments across America, sharing his story without sugarcoating his failures or his ongoing struggle to be better. Danny Sullivan enrolled in college to study criminal justice, determined to enter law enforcement, but to do it differently than his father had. He volunteered at the training center on weekends, mentoring younger students and sharing his own perspective as the child of an officer who'd failed and then fought to redeem himself. And Gloria Mitchell, though her grief would never fully heal, found purpose in her advocacy work. The center bearing her son's name had trained over 2,000 officers, and early data showed that departments implementing its curriculum saw significant reductions in use of force incidents. On the 5th anniversary of Deshawn's death, all of them gathered at his grave: Gloria, Amara, Marcus, Danny, Jennifer, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by his story. Marcus placed a bouquet of sunflowers on the grave, then stepped back, allowing Gloria her space to grieve privately. But she surprised everyone by calling him forward. "Marcus, I want you to understand something. You killed my son. That truth will never change. But you're also helping to ensure that fewer mothers have to bury their children due to police violence. Those two truths exist together, and I've learned to hold both of them. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm not done." Gloria's voice was firm but not unkind. "I will never tell you I forgive you. That's a gift I can't give. But I will tell you that I see your efforts. I acknowledge your transformation, and I respect that you're using your darkest moment to create light for others." Marcus could barely speak through his tears. "Thank you for seeing me as human, even when I failed to see Deshawn as human. Thank you for letting me honor him through my work." Gloria nodded, then turned to Amara. "And you, Dr. Hayes. You are the bridge between my pain and Marcus's redemption. You refused to let either of us stay trapped in that moment of violence. You demanded justice and offered hope, held space for accountability and transformation." Amara stepped forward, her own eyes wet. Deshawn deserved better than what happened to him. But his legacy, the lives saved, the officers trained to see people instead of threats, the families spared this grief. That legacy is beautiful. That legacy honors who he was and who he would have become. As the sun set over the cemetery, casting golden light across the gathering, something profound had shifted. Not forgiveness, necessarily, but something deeper. The recognition that broken people could rebuild, that systems could change, that tragedy could birth transformation without erasing pain. Danny stood beside his father, no longer ashamed of his name but committed to redefining what it meant. Jennifer held Gloria's hand, two mothers united by different kinds of loss and different kinds of hope. And Amara watched them all, knowing that the bruises on her throat had long since faded, but the mark she'd made on the world would last far longer. This was justice, not perfect, not painless, but real. Accountability coupled with redemption. Truth met with transformation. Dignity maintained through the hardest journey of all. Choosing hope when despair would be easier. As they left the cemetery together, Marcus turned to Amara one last time. "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that I could be better." Amara looked at him steadily. "I didn't do it for you, Marcus. I did it for every person you'll teach, every life you'll help save, every officer who will choose differently because of your story. Your redemption is secondary to your impact. I understand that, and I'm grateful for it." They walked together toward their cars, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. A federal agent who'd survived assault, a former detective who'd caused it, and all the lives connected to that moment of violence that had somehow, through grace and grit and relentless hope, transformed into something redemptive. The road to justice is long and winding, paved with pain and persistence. But sometimes, if we're brave enough to walk it together, victim and perpetrator, grieving mother and remorseful killer, broken system and determined reformers, we find that the destination isn't vengeance or forgiveness, but something more profound. The possibility of a better world built from the ruins of our worst moments. And in that possibility, in that stubborn insistence that people can change and systems can be reformed and hope can survive even the darkest valleys, we find the truest form of justice. Not justice that destroys, but justice that transforms. Not justice that ends with punishment, but justice that creates pathways for redemption while never forgetting the cost of the original harm. This is the legacy of Amara Hayes, Deshaun Mitchell, and yes, even Marcus Sullivan, the complex, painful, beautiful truth that we are all more than our worst moments, and that choosing to build bridges instead of walls is the most revolutionary act of all. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to never miss stories of courage and justice. Like if you believe dignity matters. Share to inspire someone who needs hope today. Your voice counts.